an NHS doctor. I've been working for the last 3 years, and I'm now a trainee psychiatrist. And psychiatry is something I've wanted to do since I was 14, 15. I'm now 28, and it sounds strange. Why does a teenager want to become a psychiatrist? And the truth is, it all started with my family and a loss to suicide. So I am first generation British, both my parents are South African, and when I was 2 weeks old and my parents had recently moved over to the UK, my mum received a phone call saying that her father, who was my maternal grandfather, who was a physician in South Africa, he'd unfortunately taken his own life. And this was something that was only revealed to me much later on when I was around 11, 12, and I think I heard quite a few different stories in the run-up of how he died that weren't necessarily true, but to protect me and to kind of shed that stigma. And it was a huge taboo subject. So anyhow, when I did find out at around 11, 12, I was obviously deeply disturbed to start off with and felt a great deal of compassion for my mum and her siblings. But more than anything, I was incredibly curious and very passionate about how can I help those most vulnerable in society and what does that look like. And that's where I discovered psychiatry. And so I applied to medical school later on in the game. I didn't get in first time round, but that didn't stop me. And I got in and studied at Bristol. So big up Bristol. I know, woo!
Yay!
We've got a lovely Bristol medical student here. And yeah, a Bristol local now. And so I studied at Bristol, and what became apparent to me was this splitting that I think often can happen, and an othering between doctor and patient. And somewhere along the line, whilst at medical school, I was so passionate about helping others look after their own mind, I forgot to look after my own. And I didn't think I really needed to. I didn't think it would happen to me. And then halfway through medical school, I was taking some time out to do a BSc in medical humanities and the arts, which is something I'm hugely passionate about. So big up poetry and arts for healing. And I was studying at Imperial and unfortunately had a very big family tragedy. And I was around 23 at the time, and we received a phone call to say that my grandmother had died. And it was a very sudden death, and she lived in Texas. She'd immigrated from South Africa to there. And my grandmother suffered from COPD, which for anyone who doesn't know, it's a long-term lung condition and largely due to smoking. And in America, you're allowed to get home oxygen even if you haven't stopped smoking. But luckily for our NHS here, that is not allowed, and there's a strict criteria to be put on oxygen. You have to have stopped smoking. And we begged my grandmother to not smoke whilst on the oxygen due to all the risks, obviously. And unfortunately, the phone call was to tell us that there was an explosion, and she unfortunately died in the fire from smoking on oxygen. And it was incredibly traumatic for me. It was my last living grandparent, and she was my closest grandparent. And it was just a real shock to the system. So the irony was that I was studying a medical humanities degree, and the module that I needed to complete in order to do my medical exams was on none other than death and dying. You couldn't really write it. So I had to essentially sit through very intensely emotional classes that analysed death and dying in a very different way to being on the ward as a clinical medic, because the arts is obviously a beautiful thing to be able to discuss subjective experiences, but I wasn't able to essentially partake as I was still processing my own loss. And somewhere or another, I managed to get through the degree and finish it off, but all in this survival mode. And then when that degree was finished, was when I was left all alone with my thoughts. There was nothing external, no structure, nothing to really allow me to distract my mind, and that's when everything came crashing down. And I, for a very long time, didn't want to say that anything was wrong. And I loved my grandmother dearly, but it wasn't a grief response. It was much greater than that. And so I just tried to carry on, but I started to notice that I was fatiguing very easily. I wasn't sleeping. I was experiencing a lot of insomnia. I stopped eating, and for me, I'm the biggest foodie, so that's very unusual. And I'm a big social butterfly, and I just withdrew and withdrew and withdrew. And the whole while I was thinking, this this must be down to finding the degree difficult. I was just trying to find a million excuses as to why my mood and mental state had become like this. And I thought to myself, I want to be a psychiatrist and look after other people's minds. I have this shame, I can't then go and seek help for my own mind because I need to be in the carer position. So anyhow, I thought the best thing I could do, which carried the least stigma, was to go for talking therapy. But unfortunately, it is really important, as something I'd like to teach you all today. It depends where you are in the mental illness spectrum. Talking therapy is incredibly effective, but not if you're at a crisis point. And so it's really important to take a holistic, no one-size-fits-all approach, and know that depending on where you are in that mental health journey, mental illness spectrum, different modalities of treatment will be appropriate for you. So I tried talking therapy, it was a disaster. I had just huge amounts of brain fog and was unable to concentrate on anything the therapist was saying, and I was able to hear, but I wasn't able to listen. And then eventually my wonderful support network, my partner and parents were like, you're going to the GP, you can't go on like this. And eventually I saw my GP, and what I want to just share with you all today is just that power of taking that first step and asking for help. And it was the best thing I ever did, was going to see my GP. She greeted me with such compassion and such understanding, and I really was left with feeling no shame. And so she was able to start me on an antidepressant, which I don't know if anyone feels open enough in the audience to share if they're on one. I'm still on it today, but it was the best thing I did, and I think it's so important to actually reduce this taboo around pharmacological interventions, as I'm a very holistic person. I'm big on food and mood and all of Rachel's work, and I think it's so important to say that there is a time and a place for every type of treatment, and we shouldn't stigmatise one or the other, and not everyone is fortunate to just do everything through diet and lifestyle or other more holistic interventions, and they all have a place. So I went on an antidepressant, and I was able within 4 weeks to physiologically recalibrate. I was able to sleep again and eat again, and the brain fog just started to reduce slightly so I could really gain clarity and start actually trying to think of what my next steps were for recovery. In the meanwhile, I was meant to be due back at medical school in September to complete my final 2 years, and I was in touch with the medical school saying, listen, I'm working as hard as I can to get back. How long is a piece of string? Recovery is not linear. I'll see what happens. Hopefully I'll be able to get back to complete it in September. And luckily I actually was able to do so. And what I want to share with you today is how I did that, essentially, and my kind of toolkit. So I'm big on holistic mental health and doing things in the right order for you. So for me that looked like, and I use this analogy, if you imagine that you're drowning out at sea and your head is just bobbing up and down in the water, and you can choose, do I sink or do I swim? In order to actually get your head above the water and be thrown that life jacket, that was what it was like for me when I went to my GP and I got put on antidepressants. It allowed me to just get my head above the water, to be able to visualise what the shore ahead looks like and how I'm going to swim back and what methods I need to do so. And then being able to actually swim back to shore to be able to thrive and not just survive was me getting back to my social connections, eating well for my gut health and for my brain health, and getting out into green space and nature, and as well as finding a talking therapy that works for me. So I don't know if anyone feels comfortable to say they've had talking therapy in the audience. Okay, that's great to hear. So it's finding what works for you. I didn't necessarily get on well with CBT, not to say I'm against it, but it just didn't suit me for where I was at. And I managed to find a really wonderful type of coaching called innate health and resilience coaching. And I've recently just trained to be a resilience coach as well. And I just want to share with you what it really taught me and leave you with that. How am I for time? Got a few minutes? Okay. So I want to leave you with this, and it's something that really helps me in the moment, and it's absolutely free, and it doesn't mean that you have to go out anywhere. You can just recalibrate in the moment. So what I learned through coaching was the approach of how can we go from an outside-in approach where everything in our external environment, all those circumstances are the things that are putting feelings within us and kind of create that victim mindset. And if I miss the bus, it will make me anxious. If I don't get that job promotion, it will be the end of the world and I'll feel a certain way. If, all that conditional thinking and external circumstances. And then when you can switch to an inside-out approach where you realise that actually innate health and resilience exists within all of us, and our well-being exists within all of us. And if you think of a sky and a cloudy day, the sun is always there, your well-being is always there, but your thoughts and what Rachel spoke about at, around catastrophizing and that type of thought distortion, those are the clouds that cover up your well-being, your sun, which is always there. So if you can learn to get from an outside in to an inside out approach where you can actually recalibrate and think, I'm always one thought away from well-being, by asking yourself this question and just in the moment. When your thoughts start to race and you think that the world is against you and things are happening to you rather than for you, think, where do I believe my feelings are coming from? And if you can name all these different things, a relationship breakdown, not getting a job promotion, being financially challenged, whatever, all these external things, if you can name them and think, oh, these are putting feelings in me, you can just stop for a moment and say, these things itself are actually neutral and they're not putting things within me, they're putting feelings within me. What I can do is actually recalibrate and say, I'm just one thought away from well-being and it's my perception of these things that are putting feelings inside of me. And if you can just have that just awareness, that will allow you to switch from the outside in to the inside out and think it's what we actually think about those things rather than the things themselves. And then you're less at the mercy of life, but rather you have that agency to get that one step closer to well-being. And it's not to say I don't have bad days and it's all a rainbow of life, but asking myself that question really allowed me to get through junior doctor training for the first 3 years without actually burning out. So I was really grateful actually that this experience happened to me in medical school, because being a doctor is pretty crazy. There's lots of death, there's lots of hecticness. And being able to recalibrate in the moment was my greatest skill, and I hope that that will help you today as well.